Before I jump into what the next panel is about, I wanted to sort of reflect on our morning's conversations. We at the center don't just study one area of longevity, and that's intentional, because what we've discovered, not so accidentally, is that it's hard to talk about one domain without touching on another domain. And you heard it this morning. We had a panel of finance people who were all of a sudden talking about community inequities. And we're going to have a panel here that's going to talk about community inequalities. And undoubtedly, they may touch on finances somehow. So our goal with this conference is always to sort of point out these intersection points. And I couldn't agree with Ken Dykewald even more, that in order to solve the problems, take advantage of the opportunities, you're going to need experts working across all domains. So Ken, thank you, Ken Dykewald and Ken Stern, thank you for that nice setup. So our next panel is on the equitable community, and shameless plug for our Century Lives podcast, our award-winning Century Lives podcast. In our last season, we told a lot of stories about great community inequalities. In the Streeterville neighborhood of Chicago, life expectancy tops 90 years. 9 miles away in Englewood, life expectancy is 30 years less. I think Ken Stern said no other community has that kind of disparity, but I think it's probably more common than we think. So I think in this panel, we are going to be talking about the inequities we see and how to begin to address them. And we are fortunate to have as our moderator, Eunice Lynn Nichols, who we were laughing was on a panel I moderated just a year ago. Eunice is the co-CEO of CoGenerate, along with her other co-CEO, Mark Friedman. And between the two of them have sort of established a pretty groundbreaking leadership organization, which we talked about last year. I could go through Eunice's accolades, but I would encourage you to scan the barcode on your table to read them all for yourself. So with that, I'd like to invite him to come up.
Thank you so much for joining us. For those of us that are online, just wanted to flag that we will have time to take a couple questions for those of you in the room as well. I know that these wonderful panelists will spark many thoughts for you. I asked Ken when he asked me to facilitate this what his goals were for this session, and Ken said, I would love you to dive deeper into the larger community issues that impact who gets a long life, who gets to live a healthy, well life. And already today we've heard, I think Aurora brought up the wealth gap, the generational wealth gap, the health gap. We've talked a lot about the need for more interdependence in the ways we do work. This group is going to be an amazing conversation on this topic. So I want to introduce our panelists up here. I have on the far end, Carol Larson. She's a senior research scholar currently at the Stanford Center for Longevity, and she is focused on early care and education. But I know Carol because of her longstanding history as the head of the Packard Foundation formerly. I think it's safe to say that the Encore field would not exist without the outsized impact that Carol and the funding of the Packard Foundation had on looking at purpose in the second half of life. And Carol has been a dear friend to us in our organization over the years. Next, we have Ray Jetson, who is, in addition to being the best wearer of bow ties, is the, and oh, the socks. Yes, you just follow this guy. When you think about campus casual, that's the look. So Ray has possibly the best title of anybody that you could ever want. He is the Wisdom and Longevity Catalyst and Intergenerational Co-Lead at MetroMorphosis, an asset-based social enterprise in Baton Rouge. He's also a former state representative, a pastor, and is a board member on CoGenerate, so also a dear friend to us. Carol Naughton, I've only more recently had the pleasure of meeting. She is the CEO of Purpose-Built Communities, doing some incredibly innovative work. She was featured in the Century Lives podcast. I listened to that. That is worth, no matter what's set up here, go listen to that episode because you'll get to hear Carol, some of the community members she's impacted, and hear the innovative ways that she's made such a difference in Atlanta and beyond. So with that, I want to basically start and have each one of you do a more personal introduction for an aha moment revelatory moment when this topic of the need for more equitable communities came into your life, and how that led you to the kind of work that you're doing today. Why don't we just start with you, Carol?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm glad to be here. I think I had my aha moment during the O.J. Simpson case. And it was such a fundamental wake-up call, at least to me, that Black people in this country had had a fundamentally different experience with the justice system, that it kind of gave me pause to open my eyes up and think about lots of other issues. It wasn't just the justice system. It was housing policy and education policy and economic opportunity, and all of these things were connected. And that was really my aha moment, where I made a choice to really pivot in my professional career, move from being a commercial real estate lawyer at a fancy pants firm in Atlanta to moving to the Atlanta Housing Authority, where I was part of the team that really created a new model to deliver deeply affordable housing, something that we now call mixed income housing, which is designed to create ways for low, moderate, and higher income families to live together seamlessly. And I've built the last 30 years of my career kind of on that fundamental pivot.
Thank you, Carol. Over to you, Ray.
But for me, there have been two. The first was in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. At the time, I served as a deputy secretary for our then Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals in the aftermath. And I was asked by our then Governor Kathleen Blanco to lead one of 3 not-for-profits that she created. This one was focused on displaced New Orleanians who were impacted by the storm. And so I spent 3 years traveling across the southeastern part of the country, basically, speaking with people who were ready to come home, to a community that was not ready to receive them, and to realize the disparities in all kind of life circumstances that were faced by these amazing people through no fault of their own. And to realize, as has been said, that Hurricane Katrina did not create any inequities. It simply revealed the depth of them in the community. And so that was a really profound moment for me. I was coming home after spending a whole week on the road, driving to my mom's house in the neighborhood that I grew up in, and realized that there was not a great difference between the 9th Ward in New Orleans and Eden Park, the neighborhood I grew in, except one had been flooded and the other had not. And so that was a powerful moment for me. The second was May 25th, 1984, and I would not realize it until much later that it was such a pivotal moment because that was a day that my father died at 54. And I didn't understand how young he was until I observed my 54th birthday. And there aren't many days since then that I don't wake up with a bit of survivor's guilt and wonder, why did this great man leave here at 54? And it's 13 years later, and I'm 67 and still here. And what in the hell do I do with those days and those years?
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Ray. Carol.
Well, thanks for giving us a heads up about this question. So it made me think, and it brings me back to 50 years ago, this very month. And I was entering my junior year here at Stanford, majoring in Laura's Department of Developmental Psychology, headed towards psych graduate school. And I took some time off and volunteered with a lobbyist in Sacramento who was working on issues about meeting the developmental needs of children in foster care in California. So I hung out with her and went to legislator and talked about these issues and saw how little people care about kids, let alone foster care, let alone the developmental needs of kids in foster care. And I also met some lawyers up there, and they said, if you like this stuff, go to law school. And that's when I heard about Marian Wright Edelman and her starting just a few years earlier, her work with the Children's Defense Fund. So I did a career pivot at that, I've done several since then, but a career pivot at that early age to go to law school with the sole purpose of working on equity issues for kids through policy and paying a special attention to their developmental needs.
I'm realizing as I look at this panel, probably collectively between the three of you, we probably have like 20 careers represented up here. So longer lives also means ability to contribute in different ways at different stages. All right, I'm going to pivot over back to you, Carol, to talk about the purpose-built community model, because I think we have a lot of people in our audience who have been inspired by the things said today, but have a lot of questions on how do we actually build equitable communities that work for all of us. One of my personal heroes, Eric Liu, who runs a Citizen University, often says, we're all better off when we're all better off. And yet we're really only better off for a smaller number of our community members. So Carol, what is the purpose-built community? Can you give us a concrete example of what that model looks like in action?
Sure. Purpose-built communities, we're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Atlanta, and we help folks around the country strengthen neighborhoods so that those people who live in those neighborhoods experience greater racial equity, better health outcomes, and upward economic mobility. We are neighborhoodists. That word does not roll off the tongue. Say it with me, neighborhoodists. Because we recognize that neighborhoods shape us in really fundamental ways. They shape all of us. They provide resources around housing, around schools, around economic opportunities. They send very clear messages about what the world thinks about you and thinks about your place in the world. And so we look at the neighborhood as a unit of change. How can we help strengthen neighborhoods so that they become really springboards that propel people to become who they were meant to be? So we have a very specific model that is centered in neighborhood voice and power. And within that process of creating a new plan, there are 4 components that always exist. The first is high quality mixed income housing. How do we create housing that serves people across a broad range of incomes? For a variety of reasons. Number one, we live in a capitalist society, and we've got to be able to attract investment into the neighborhood. And that's part of it. We've got to get economics in neighborhoods where they don't exist, but also because we are optimists. We do not believe that people are going to be poor forever, right? So if we're getting this right, if we create housing across a broad range of incomes in a neighborhood, people can choose to stay in the neighborhood because the housing meets their need. If it doesn't, as they do better, they will do what folks do. They will vote with their feet and they will leave. So mixed income housing, a neighborhood serving cradle through college education pipeline that starts with really high quality early care and learning for every little genius to get everybody ready for kindergarten and beyond, with an expectation that all people will graduate from high school with a financeable, actionable plan for the next part of their lives. And we also think about community health and wellness. I think that's really where there's an opportunity for us to be thinking about how do we make sure that every little person in our communities, the places where we are invited to work, experience the conditions that are going to drive great outcomes for early health and child development, which lead to a foundation for great health and mental and physical health the rest of their lives. The fourth part is around economic vitality. As I said, we've got to have economics in neighborhoods. Otherwise, they just don't work as ecosystems. So how do you create those economics, and how do you make sure that the people who live there share in that economic opportunity through different kinds of investment in businesses and entrepreneurship and a variety of different strategies? But the secret sauce to this work is what we would call a community quarterback organization that is part of the infrastructure of the neighborhood that includes people who live in the neighborhood and other leaders who work with the community to create the vision and then figure out the strategy to implement it. They continue to nurture it, sustain it over time. And this is a generational effort. It's not 3 years, 5 years, and you're out. This is really thinking about how do we create the conditions over time that meet people's needs. And we've got some great examples, but I've been going on a little bit. So I will yield the floor if you would like.
Between 2 lawyers and a pastor,
Yeah.
they told me I
We are
have to hold them back.
enthusiastic
So it's a
talkers.
really hard job. It's a really hard job. No, but thank you for that. And
Yeah.
I think what I hear is the need for deep and complex partnerships.
Yes.
And I think the role of the community quarterback organization, which I believe you were the first executive director of one of those organizations
Correct.
that got you started. So we'll come back to that.
Yes.
But I want to pop over to Ray because MetroMorphosis also has a deep asset-based community model. I'm wondering if you might layer on to what Carol said and tell us a little bit about your model.
A couple of things. First of all, the tagline of MetroMorphosis is transforming urban communities from within. The emphasis on from within. One of the most repeated statements that we make is that the resources necessary to transform inner city neighborhoods in a sustainable way cannot be imported exclusively. That you must recognize the assets that are there. Unfortunately, there are so many sincerely well-meaning folks who show up with a deficit-based mindset. For them, inner city neighborhoods are something that is broken, that needs to be fixed. We say build, not fix. But building requires recognizing that there are assets that exist, that can be built upon, and that if you look deeply enough into the history of these neighborhoods, at one time existed in very vibrant and thriving ways. And so there is not this deficit of capacity to change lives and to build a better future. Our model that we use at MetroMorphosis begins with the notion of engaging and convening stakeholders. Who are the people who really have a stake in the well-being of this community, and how do you help them see themselves as a community rather than these disparate slices of human experience and human life. After that, we identify and advocate for best practices. There's nothing new under the sun. And if you look long enough, you'll find somebody who's doing a good job of that thing that you really want to do. And so we see our role as being the students of the best practices and the advocates for them. We then focus on the development of equitable processes. One of the things that we have discovered over time is that there are people who talk about equitable outcomes with inequitable processes. The process does not legitimately center the voice of the people whose life it really is. And so how do you deal with power imbalances? How do you create processes that truly elevate the folks who have the most at stake in the conversation that you are having? We then have strategic ways to equip and develop the community members so that they are the owners of their own future. And then we give great attention to influencing, creating, and supporting narrative change. How do we tell different stories about urban communities, and how do we support the people who live in urban communities to tell different stories about themselves? Two kind of add-ons to that. One, we believe that a critical ingredient is a pipeline of leaders who are familiar with communities. And so we are in our 9th cohort of the Urban Leadership Development Initiative, where we spend 9.5 months with people who live in inner city neighborhoods, work in inner city neighborhoods, or have some demonstrated commitment to urban neighborhoods, talking to them about a different practice of leadership. The term practice of leadership is important because far too often we understand leadership as a position or a role or a title. And I would argue that there are a lot of folks in positions of leadership who don't practice leadership. And so we talk about leadership as practice. The last part of it is the notion of building inclusive economies. Over the scope of the last 7.5 years, we've worked with minority, women-owned businesses, veteran-owned businesses in urban communities to the tune of about $33 million in contracts, because if you really want to make a community strong, allow it to thrive economically.
I love that. I also love that Ray backs up what he says with his own actions. Ray co-leads with a wonderful partner, Sharita Harrison, who is his junior, And they share the, like Mark and I, co-CEO role. We were very much inspired by him. I feel like a way that I've seen you invest in community is invest deeply in younger leaders, and then give them a platform for doing real work and partnership. All right, Carol, I want to ask you a question. You're in a unique position. You retired from the Packard Foundation. You could have done anything. You had deep investments in sustainability and reproductive health, so many things, children, family, and welfare. You made a very specific decision to go to Stanford Center on Longevity and to focus on one topic. Why and how has that shifted your last year?
Well, it goes back to that 50 years ago conversation and really being interested in coming full circle and returning to actually trying to work on something that would be really meaningful for young children and their families. And interspersed with that intergenerational connection, because another aha moment for me was 25 years ago, when John Gardner called me up and said, I'd really like you to meet Mark Friedman. And you know, if we don't do something about the aging baby boomers and getting them connected and not isolated from young children and their families, we're going to have a real political problem on our hands. And so we've only gotten more segregated since then. So I had a chance in the rewiring phase to say, okay, I'm going to go back to those early interests of mine. And of course, I'd met Laura along the way because of her great work with the New Map of Life and her interest in intergenerational connection. Turns out we have a wonderful moment in California where we can do something meaningful for our youngest children, birth to 5. And there has been tremendous investment, a silver lining, I don't know if you'd call it that, to the from the American Recovery Act of investment in preschool and in childcare and in subsidized preschool, not anywhere near what we need. But here in California, one of the big breakthroughs has been to make preschool for 4-year-olds, I know other states have done this, free and available through the public schools. But guess what? You know, like I did learn 50 years ago, passing the legislation isn't the end of the story, it's implementing it. And they're rolling it out and they're trying to implement it. And Learning Policy Institute, you know, very well-respected group, looks at this situation and said, there's no way we're going to successfully roll this out and really make quality preschool for 4-year-olds available in California unless we have 11,000 new lead teachers and 17,000 second adults in the room to help meet the child and adult ratios that are required. So I wanted to talk with people on the ground in California, and I have a wonderful research partner over here, Claire Jordan. And together we've probably talked to 100 people in California over the last year and a half. Superintendents, principals, county supervisors, city council people, asking them how are they addressing this workforce challenge. And honestly, I mean, they're doing wonderful things. The state's funding wonderful apprenticeship programs for young people to learn to enter the early childhood field. And there are lots of great thinking going around about increasing the pipeline. I didn't encounter one that had thought about people who were 50 and older as being a solution or a part of a solution hiding in plain sight. It was only as I talked to community college people who said, you know, we have a lot of people over 50 in our community college system. And in fact, our research assistant looked it up and I think it comes close, depending whether you go over 50 or over 55, to like 100,000 Californians enrolled in community college at those ages, because it's an equity issue for them too, along the finance needs, having a career path, being welcome. But honestly, and please correct me online or anyone here if you know of a great example where an HR department of a large child development center or of a school is actually intentionally recruiting older people. So that's what we're working on. We're starting 3 different pilots, and I hope I can come back or see you in the hallways at the next one to tell you that we've learned something about that older people are interested, or they aren't, that it really does have good impact on the classroom. Age diversity is an asset, that it increases equity for the children, for the young teachers, for their parents, and that, that this is an asset-based caring community approach that doesn't overlook this significant part of the population.
I love that. I also feel like just tying some of your comments to what Carol Naughton said earlier about the importance of if we don't have viable education and care for kids at the earliest stages, it's hard for families to stay, and then it's hard to age in place there. So I feel like your work is so tied in. Also wanted to comment, one of the programs that we track through CoGenerate runs Reading Corps and Math Corps, and there's a program, one of their sites this past year did an intentional innovation to bring older and younger AmeriCorps reading tutors together to pair up and tutor together. And then they did a pre and post survey. And while it's not early care and education at the 0 to 5 level, we were really heartened to see that in their post surveys, the younger AmeriCorps members said they felt much more effective as tutors because they were paired with older tutors. And the reverse was true too. They reported kind of 10% higher satisfaction and competency and confidence than those who were working in a non-age diverse corps. So I think the work that you're doing, Carol, is really important, and I hope people rally to the cause. All right, Ray, this panel would not be complete if we didn't turn our attention to a new initiative that you launched earlier this year called Aging While Black. I would love for you to tell us a little bit about why you feel that initiative is so important. What are the essential components, and what might we learn in the audience today about that we can take home?
Thank you very much. I just want to preface my remark by saying that the work with older adults and early childhood expansion should be one of those 5 or 6 things that Ken talked about that should be elevated to a national conversation and a national effort. I think it just intersects at so many important points. In February, we launched Aging While Black because while it is really exciting and important to talk about the 100-year life, I know a whole lot of folks that if you talk to them about living 100 years, they tell you get the hell out of here. For a couple of reasons. First of all, because nobody in their neighborhood is living to be 100. And secondly, life for them has been so inequitable and such a stress that why am I interested in staying around here that long, living in the conditions that we face? Aging While Black is focused on investigating the intersection of aging and race and creating a discourse, because it is there that you will find, as is the case with so many of the other intersections with aging, that there are huge disparities, huge inequities that have to be addressed if we are truly going to move this conversation about aging and its criticality to our well-being as a world beyond this very homogeneous, monolithic conversation that happens in so many situations. It is important that we actually spend time and investigate the intersection. And so we've had conversations across this country. We've sought to build movement across the country. It's been more than I could have ever imagined, but we've built Aging While Black around 3 pillars. The first is what we describe as recalibrating the village. And the argument that is made there is that the infrastructure necessary to support aging in general, Black aging in particular, is wholly ill-prepared for what has already begun to happen in terms of aging. And so how do we become thoughtful in an intentional way about the infrastructure? The second is embracing innovation and technology. How do we move beyond the, in my opinion, staid conversation around digital divide and start talking about real and practical ways that technology can begin to fill many of the gaps that we see in urban communities and urban aging? And then finally, the last is leaning into Sankofa. Sankofa is this West African term which speaks to making benevolent use of the past. And so how do we, in very intentional and structured ways, tap into the wisdom of elders to build stronger communities, stronger families, and stronger organizations? One of the reasons that I moved from Chief Executive Catalyst to Wisdom and Longevity Catalyst is to demonstrate in a very practical way how organizational leaders can move over without moving out and create pathways for emerging and talented folks, while at the same time capitalizing on the wisdom that has been gained over the years. That's Aging While Black in a nutshell. There are some cards around here on Aging While Black with QR codes on your table. Would invite you to take a look at the website and follow up with us.
Thank you. Carol, you had talked earlier about the.
Yeah, which one?
Oh, this Carol. Yes, I'm looking at this Carol. You had talked earlier about the importance of mixed income housing. Why is that so important? And I know there's been some more recent research on how when people who are lower income have built genuine friendships and relationships with people from different income structures, they have access to different networks. Can you give us some examples of how that has happened through purpose-built communities? And maybe more importantly, how that might become accessible to more communities?
Yeah, thank you. So, this goes back to an article from the 1960s about the importance of loose ties, right? And it's not just lower income people benefiting and higher income people not benefiting. It's not just one way. It's the wisdom and the life experience and the perspective that flows both ways in the course of a relationship, an authentic relationship. And I know there's more research coming out of Raj Chetty's shop, Opportunity Insights, that demonstrates the power of mixed income neighborhoods in terms of increasing economic mobility. And his research shows that the only kind of social capital that makes a difference on economic mobility is this relationship of people across income bands. That's not to say the other kinds of social capital aren't absolutely critical, but if you're only looking at economic mobility, that's the one that makes a difference. I think the other kinds of social capital we heard about today that create relationships and friendships and the kinds of things that make life worth living are not captured in that stuff, but we know that they're captured in critical in other ways. So by creating mixed income housing, you at least create the opportunity to create mixed income schools and mixed income YMCAs and mixed income rec centers. And you create the opportunity for people to get to know each other across what has now become one of the biggest divides, which is your economic status. And so we're definitely seeing, we're seeing, great rates of high school graduation and college completion and all those kinds of different things. But there are other things too. In the East Lake neighborhood of Atlanta, where I served as the CEO of that community quarterback many, many years ago. In 2019, right before the pandemic, the boys golf team at the neighborhood school won the state championship in golf. Right now, this is a very cool thing. Anytime a school wins a state championship in any kind of sport, but it was the first time that an Atlanta public school had ever won a state championship in golf. And it was the first time any place in the country that an all-Black team had won the state championship in golf. So what we're talking about are creating opportunity-rich ecosystems that appeal to kids and families across a broad range of incomes, that create the genuine opportunity for these relationships to be built and to become a real part of your life.
Kind of keep on the topic of resourcing. Many of us who are doing this work are probably find that there isn't enough resourcing to do it. I'm gonna just give you fair warning, Carol Larson. Dan, I'm gonna pop down to you because I feel like you are in a sort of a unique situation. So Carol ran the Packard Foundation for decades and was in the position of providing resourcing. So I want you to wear that hat. But right now, Carol is out on the hunt for funding for her project for early care and education and bringing an intergenerational lens to it. So you've now sat on the other side.
A lot more fun being on there.
But it means we have somebody who can actually represent both sides. So what would you say to funders today?
And that doesn't mean just private philanthropy, but if you're in a government position or any other where you have the privilege of having resources to give to people, take that privilege and that accountability really, really seriously. We've heard I'm sure we could ask each of you stories about bad experiences with philanthropy. I do think there are a lot of great things happening, though, of more and more foundations caring not just about what they do, but about how they do it, about authentic or meaningful engagement of stakeholders, about shared power, about adaptive or emergent strategies and evaluation. I think there is in trust philanthropy. I think there is some real progress in people's understanding that real change doesn't happen unless you do that, unless you do some of the things that you two have been talking about. The other problem is the siloization. Is that the word? Is that anyway? Of just like all those phone calls I've been making, like, or even actually just going and standing on a corner in a city where there's a senior center, a volunteer center, a child development center, an elementary school, a healthcare clinic. And I ask to what interaction there is between the aging or the seniors centers and the young people serving, and there isn't any. And one of the reasons that happens is because all the money comes funneling down, you know, through completely different systems in California, whether you're talking about services or systems for people who are getting older versus young. So I think the second problem, besides engaging stakeholders, sharing power, emergent strategies, is that siloization. And, you know, Trent Stamp back here with Eisner Foundation, I think for many years, certainly true for California, but I think across the country, is one of the only foundations that has actually tried to look at both the real intergenerational connections and look at holistic programs that think about older and young together. I don't know, I'll be quick. You're in trouble with me because I not only am a lawyer, but I also am a preacher's daughter. So, but Ken, you mentioned it, several people mentioned it here earlier today about changing the frame of independence, pull yourself up, to dependence and caring. I see Ai-jen Poo sitting here. Mark and, well, Eunice and Ai-jen did a wonderful dialogue that's on the CoGenerate website about viewing holistically an approach to a caring community, a community that cares about each other, for each other, and that's not a negative, that's a good thing. And that we need to change that. So I would say for philanthropy, or for those seeking money, or for all of us in the room that want to actually bring about change, we need to keep making progress on that. That is a bigger idea that you all mentioned. So
I want to make sure we have some time for questions that might have percolated up in the audience here or online. Any questions online? I'm not sure who my person is who might be tracking. Not yet. Okay. Any questions in the room for these panelists? Yeah. Can you wait 1 second for the microphone? Thank you.
Hi, preacher's daughter, preacher. What role do religious institutions have in helping communities thrive in the future in the growing aging population?
Great question.
I will just say that historically, in African-American communities, the Black church has been a critical anchor in almost everything important. But unfortunately, over time, there has been a more introverted perspective that has happened in so many congregations, and disconnect from younger generations to a point that they are, in many important conversations, a non-factor. But the other side of that is I don't believe that fundamental transformation can happen without them. So it is a point of attention that needs to happen.
yeah, I'm Norwegian Lutheran, Minnesota. But it also is a diminishing institution. We have a great bishop, a woman bishop, you know, the ELCA. And when you go to a place like Minneapolis, you can really see where churches still are a focal point. One of the few we have in any community where people, they're actually intergenerational, where people show up for each other. And in a highly diversified Twin City area, for example, it is crossing bridges, whether they're there because of their religion or because it's an important institution in the community, one of the few places you can go and actually see people who look different from you and who are of different ages. I don't know, it still has a vital role, but definitely on the religion side of things, it's tough sledding coming ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me, kind of circling back full circle to where Chip Conley started us about we need to work on the practice of building friendships. When I think of places where we can build strong friendships across difference, including intergenerational difference, faith communities is one. I think service is another, places where you can actually come together, do something good, be called to a higher purpose. So I think there's a really important role there for faith institutions. One other question, Ken? Yeah.
Mr. Patrikoff, where is out? Mr. Patrikoff, who told me that he was the oldest person in the room at 88, and we haven't heard enough about state of mind. So I'm going to aim this to you guys. We got a lot of psychotherapists and social workers who have methods of being reimbursed. We have churches and synagogues and mosques galore. I don't hear a lot of innovative leadership coming out of our mind state professions. Do you?
Short answer is no. Certainly not in the communities where we spend a lot of our time. I mean, the clinicians are still centering in programs and systems rather than centering people and developing different approaches to seeing what's there.
Because when you say, for example, about bringing elders and children together, it's kind of like, duh, right?
I have trouble with this, Mike.
They get the funding one way and the other.
Yeah, and I think it's what Mark's written about so much, and it's just that every institution has gotten age segregated more. And the sparks that happen in a community when people try to bust those down are pretty amazing. But yes, I don't see it, and it's ageism too. It's just I loved how you called different people out. I'm sure for even the language we use, like I'm proudly 71. Actually, I'm not quite. I'm only 70. But see, I did it.
That's how proud you
Right?
are.
I just did it right there. So no, I'm still young. No, anyway.
Yeah.
But no, we do need more vocal leadership. I think where you see it is at a local level. And I think what you're asking for and suggesting we all think about is how do you actually think about that in a really big way at a national level? How can you make this happen? And I know some things are happening at AmeriCorps with Senior Corps, and I mean, we need to fan it more.
Yeah.
This is where I think it's helpful to put a neighborhood lens on this kind of question right here. People experience life through a neighborhood, right? If you think about all the services delivered in vertical horizontals, the vertical silos, the horizontal through them is a neighborhood. That's how I experience my life. So we could look at neighborhoods as an opportunity to pilot those kinds of connections. How could folks who live 2 blocks away participate in an early learning center and make it easy for people to be successful? And it wouldn't take that long to pilot it to find out if there's real community interest in it. And we could then take that and model that and go beyond. But I think that neighborhood becomes a really powerful lens to look at those kinds of things that can shape what can happen at the national level.
We're going to try to do here with Fresno and Santa Cruz and LA and some of those. And I'm sure there are other examples we'll find, but yeah, why not have a caring core for your community that spans the age range? Be part of a joyful army of people who want to work on these healthy, emotional well-being communities.
We are at time, so I'm going to do 10-second rapid fire, real rapid fire through each of you. If you could give one word, one out breath of advice or encouragement to people who are trying to create equitable communities that work for people of all ages, what would you say? We'll start with Carol at the end.
Don't forget the youngest kids. We've all talked about it. The foundation of the birth to 5 is so important. And it also is hard for people to disagree about. No, we do, but it can be a unifying focus for a community, I believe.
Investigate the intersections.
Go upstream as far as you can on these issues, whether we're talking about age or health or economic mobility, go upstream.
Thank you. You all are wonderful.